Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gerardo Perez, and I am with Beacon Health Options. I am their Community Engagement Coordinator for the North Central Washington region. And that right now covers Chelan, Douglas, Grant, and Okanagan counties. And so today I was asked to do, or I think I volunteered myself to do a presentation on the North Central Washington Crisis Line and how that can benefit you, not just from a family or youth perspective, but if you're coming from an organization or provider, how you can share the information with the people that you're helping. And so, yeah, before we begin, I just want to share a little information about who is Beacon Health Options. So this is sort of wondering, why are we at a lot of these tables? And so, about a couple years ago, I want to say January 1st of 2018, there was a pretty big change to how Apple Health is provided in Washington State. So there was a transition, so that's where, so Melina was definitely here beforehand. I'm sure a lot of these organizations too, like Coordinated Care of America Group, but now, after that January 1st, 2018, people that qualify for Apple Health, they have a choice between those three plans. So American Group, Coordinated Care, and Molina. Those are a managed care organization. And then another acronym for you, BHASO, that stands for Behavioral Health Administrative Services Organization. And that's what Beacon is. And so what we do is we oversee the behavioral health crisis system that is publicly funded. And so anyone is welcome to utilize the crisis system. There's different components to it, and then sometimes they look different even from county to county. And so with Beacon, what we want, definitely one of the services that we provide across the region that is the same is the North Central Washington Crisis Line. And then we also work very closely with our managed care organization partners too, just because since anyone can call that crisis line, we do get folks that are Apple Health eligible, but then we also get folks that are non-Apple Health eligible. And then when that occurs, in some situations, we can provide a limited set of behavioral health crisis supports as well. So that's kind of a little overview of who Beacon is. We're definitely a national organization, and so right now in Washington State, we're in Southwest Washington region, North Central Washington region, and then now in Pierce, Washington region. Okay, so that's just an overview of who Beacon Health Options is. So I'll get to the meat of today's content. So that's the North Central Washington Crisis Line overview. So I know I've been attending for quite some time, or several meetings now, so you probably already noticed my crisis line boxes. And so that's just our way of being able to share the different materials that we have, because we have them in Spanish and English. And so we have rack cards, and then we have our business size cards. Unfortunately, I didn't bring any spare posters to share individually, but there are some in the sealed boxes within. And so, yeah, the crisis line is available 24/7, 365, and again, that's to anyone regardless of age, income, or insured status. And so I always joke that Warren Buffett could call the crisis line and he would get the same service as anyone else, and he would never get that bill. So I'm sure he'd be good for it. But anyways, anyone can call that number. And also, we encourage others to call on behalf of perhaps a loved one or someone that they're currently serving. So parents can call on behalf of their youth, just because maybe there could be some questions of, hey, my youth is exhibiting these types of behaviors, and so the person that answers the crisis line, that's going to be someone that is clinically trained. And so the first level is a bachelor level clinician, and then from there they just triage the situation, because a crisis episode can take a lot of forms, and so sometimes it can be like a slow lead up to a full crisis episode, or sometimes it can be in that moment where, wow, we need support right now. And so in those situations, what they would do is sometimes they can turn to law enforcement just to do a wellness check, or sometimes they turn to emergency services like an ambulance, or sometimes they turn to another acronym for you, a DCR, and that's a designated crisis responder. And so with Beacon, we work very closely with the providers that have those DCRs, the designated crisis responders, and they're the ones that are going out in the community and doing ITA evaluations, and that's Involuntary Treatment Act. And so that's one of those situations where there's a community member who they're in a very perhaps a manic state where they can't ensure the safety of themselves or of others. Or the third one is property, if they're damaging property. So they go out and do an evaluation, and then if they meet that criteria, they can be sent to an involuntary treatment facility. Okay, and so again, crisis line, it's definitely, again, available 24/7, 365. And so, like I mentioned, privacy is definitely a priority, and so folks, they're welcome to remain anonymous. And so that person on the other line, they'll just ask for a callback number in case of any disconnect, or ask for location, again, just depending on situations. So that way, if they do get disconnected, they can at least send someone their way. Hey, any questions so far on what I've been sharing? Okay. And so I actually brought some crisis line statistics just to give you an idea of what that looks like. And so, I haven't had a chance to input October's data yet. I did receive it, so unfortunately this only includes up to, so this is from January 2019 until September of 2019. And so on average, we're actually seeing around 319 calls. And that's a little, and so that's the average. And then on the very high end, what we've seen was up to 450 calls for the whole region. And so again, that's Chelan, Douglas, Grant, and Okanogan counties. And so
per month?
Yeah, per month. So on average, that's the caller frequency that we're seeing. Yep, but that's including wrong numbers or hangups. Because sometimes other folks will call from another part of the state, but then we would direct them to their appropriate crisis system. Yeah, and so like I mentioned, so folks can call on their own behalf, or calling about a child, or calling about another adult, and we definitely partner with our providers as well. So law enforcement, they're hopefully aware, all of them are aware of the crisis line, and so they work, because then again, those DCRs, when they encounter someone in the community that's acting perhaps erratically, so they can contact the DCRs and then begin that Involuntary Treatment Act investigation if needed. Okay, and so as for like how each individual call looks like, and so right now the state, not average, but state requirement for abandonment rate. So that means how many calls don't pick up for whatever reason. So the state is at 5%, and so fortunately the average is at 4%, and so that's something that we're hoping to keep as low as possible, because the last thing we want for folks is for them to be called a crisis line, but then for whatever reason that call doesn't get picked up. Because I know sometimes situations do arise, there could be technical challenges, and so that's where folks are welcome to give me a call to share experiences too. Maybe they have a crisis line, they shared it with someone, and then that person shares, like, I called the crisis line, but it wasn't up to my expectations, and that's where you're more than welcome to. On the crisis line boxes, it has all my contact information, phone number, email, so let me know, and then we can definitely look kind of what happened and then what should happen. So yeah, average call length. So right now, when someone calls the crisis line, the average call length is 6.8 minutes, so that's probably like 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And then another type of call length that we measure is the clinical length, because then when we encounter someone that is definitely exhibiting signs of maybe hurting themselves or hurting others, or definitely spiraling into a behavioral health crisis episode, those calls tend to be a little longer. That's around 23 minutes. So again, it just really depends on what the situation is, because the crisis line, it's also able to make referrals to different resources, and so we're always looking to our community providers just to keep our information up to date. So then that way, if someone from Okanogan County calls, we're not referring them to services in Grant County, because that wouldn't be too helpful. So right now, so I mentioned total average calls was around 319, and of those in Grant County, we have an average of 133 callers. So it's pretty much in line with what we're seeing, kind of like an even split among the counties. Okay, and so when someone calls a crisis line, you're probably wondering, well, like, can they handle these types of situations? I've been asked, can they handle like domestic violence, if a behavioral health crisis that's arising from a potential domestic violence situation, or maybe how do they respond to community members who identify in the LGBTQ+ community? And so, when we receive the information, definitely that clinician, they're able to, they're trained in many ways, and so they have training specific to domestic violence, or how to be more considerate of the LGBTQ+ community. And so they'll definitely see kind of your full, what you expect in a crisis episode. So like anxiety, that tends to be always a very high symptom, not symptom, but something that is seen among a lot of callers. So anxiety, they start to see some psychosis as well. Definitely a lot of folks are calling about their relationships, and not just marital, but like maybe a domestic partner. And it really goes from there. So substance abuse, grief, loss, and then also workplace issues. I'll handle a little bit of that. So really just trying to get that person the help they need. And definitely another thing that they handle too is suicide prevention. And so the way they do their reporting is essentially those clinical calls, like I mentioned, they tend to be a little longer, and then they identify if there's suicidal ideation present. And then what they do is they utilize their clinical training to hopefully give them tools in that moment and not continue that suicidal ideation. So in a nutshell, that's typically what the crisis line is. That's kind of the core responsibilities that we provide. So any questions on the crisis line?
How many calls can you answer at the same time?
Well, that's a good question. Because right now, so the current provider of the crisis line is Protocol. And the way to provide this 24/7, it's so definitely a telephonic service, and there's 3 call centers across the United States. And so they can take quite a bit, because I think what they've done too is they've identified periods where it's more higher than normal activity. And so I don't know if I have a specific number, like what's that max number look like? Because I know there's sometimes what ends up happening if it's too much, they'll pick up the phone and then they'll ask if they can be put on a temporary hold. Again, first they want to speak, so first they'll speak to a live person and then go from there. So unfortunately I don't have that exact number, but they definitely have planned around that, like what happens, because I think what they've seen is maybe more on the weekend and then in the later hours is where they've noticed more caller activity. So, yeah, any other questions? And then,
What's
Carlos.
Beacon's process after someone has called the crisis line and had that, that discussion for the treatment after the call?
Oh yeah, great question. So, like I mentioned, so Beacon, we can provide a limited set of behavioral health services, or it's case management. But then for folks that are Apple Health, what we do is, so behind the scenes, my coworker, she's not here today, unfortunately, she will take that information and then she'll look up their eligibility. And then if needed, she'll pass them along to the appropriate Apple Health plan, because then the thinking is, we've identified someone that's called a crisis line, let's get them connected with their insurance plan to then offer them more outpatient services in the community. Again, if it goes that route where they're able to be stabilized in the community, but sometimes if it's a higher level of need, it just really depends. So to give you an idea, let's say a caller is in Chelan and Douglas counties, just because that's where I reside and I've seen this sometimes happen. They can refer to other services, like sometimes they'll go to the emergency room, they can do, hopefully get that person stabilized there in the emergency room setting, or they can refer them to Parkside and crisis stabilization. And so, again, just trying to get them that help in the moment. But then our thinking is, so the philosophy that we want to prevent future crisis episodes just because that leads to better health outcomes for that individual, but then also, hopefully in the long term, with that appropriate level of care, they're, again, not going into a crisis episode. And then for folks that are non-Medicaid, like I alluded to, Dina, she reaches out to them, and then so definitely talks with them and sees kind of what's their ongoing situation, and tries to refer services to them. And so in her case, she can reach out daily, sometimes weekly, it just depends on that person. Some people, they want that service, and sometimes they're like, no, I think I'm good now, and then, so it really just depends on that person.
So what's the time frame from the call to the crisis line until they get a follow-up?
Oh, daily. It's pretty daily. So let's say someone calls on a Friday, and then the weekend happens, because fortunately we're not on our desk 24/7 or 7 days out of the week. So if someone calls on a Friday evening, Dina will typically receive it if there's no technical challenges, because in the beginning there are some things we were just ironing out the bugs, but now that we're in 2 years into having the crisis line, on Monday morning she'll get those logs and then she'll process them and then send them out to their appropriate managed care organization.
Which was next business working
So
day,
next,
depending on holidays.
Yeah, so exactly, depending on holidays, but for the most part it's a daily transfer of information. Yeah, great question, Carlos. So one more thing I want to share. So, like I mentioned, this is the core responsibilities of the crisis line, but actually, in the near future, January 1st of 2020, we're actually going to be changing providers. So I mentioned that Protocol is a current provider, but after January 1st of 2020, we're actually going to be moving to, their name is Crisis Connections. And so we're very excited because right now they're the crisis line provider in King County, and they've been in operation for more than 50 years. And right now they've handled, I think, because just recently we had Ali, their executive director, and Dipti, their senior, I don't want to make sure I get their titles correct, their senior director of clinical operations. They attended a meeting not too long ago here in Moses Lake. And so they've been in operations for more than 50 years, and their philosophy is trying to find that least restrictive treatment first, and then also be recovery oriented. And so we're excited to partner with them because since they've been a player for many years in the crisis line scene, they actually offer 3 services, one specific to youth, the Teen Talk. And so right now that's actually open to anyone, but what's really exciting is because we'll be working closely with them. And so I unfortunately don't have those numbers, but if you look up their website, crisisconnections.org, you can see more about their Teen Talk. And then they also have a Washington Recovery Helpline. I may be getting these names incorrect, but
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's Team Link.
thank you. Yeah, I was saying not Teen Talk, but Team Link. Yep. that line is operated by actual teens, and so it's for teens that can talk with another teen. I think, yeah, they definitely rely, I think a lot, not rely, but they definitely utilize the peer model. And then for the Washington Recovery line, definitely for folks that want to go into recovery or are currently in recovery, just to speak with someone that's walked that particular road in life. And then the other one too, they offers a warm line. So in situations where a caller just wants to call with someone, but it doesn't necessarily rise to that level where they need an intervention in the moment, they just really want to talk to someone. Yeah, that's the warm line where someone can just speak to someone. And so I mentioned this because, so our first goal on January 1st, 2020 is just to ensure that the crisis line is still picked up, and then also those designated crisis responders, they're able to be dispatched out in the community. So we want to take some baby steps in the beginning, but then after that crawling phase, you want to take a, definitely like a short-term look at like how we can definitely make the crisis line more helpful for here in our community. And so I really encourage folks here at the table just to kind of think, what would they like to see on our crisis line? If you have any ideas, please let me know. Because, like I said, definitely our first goal is just if we do our job correctly after January 1st, that crisis line, like folks shouldn't notice a difference in that service. But then afterwards, yeah, we just really want to see how we can make that more part of integrated care. Because I know, so let's say, for example, someone from Columbia Valley, the clinic there, they call. We are, at the moment, we can't share that information with Columbia Valley, the clinic. But what we're hoping to is that in the future, because I think that'd be very helpful from a clinic perspective or a school perspective, like, hey, we noticed that this person called. We just want to give you a heads up, so in that way it's not like, oh, you know, kind of like that heads up. So that's something that's been discussed, like how we can be part of more of that integrated care. Because currently as it is, we're really only sharing information with the managed care organization because there's a lot of challenges to consider. I think a technical challenge, but then also the security and privacy challenge. We just want to make sure we don't go to HIPAA jail. So I'm sure that's not a real thing, but I've been talking enough on that. Yep. Yeah. Privacy.
Police are out there.
Yeah. So yeah, just definitely, yeah, I want to be very mindful of the challenges for it. But yeah, no, I'm very excited to.
Would
Go ahead.
you or would somebody in your organization be willing to come and introduce Team Talk or Team Link to the kids as a resource, or?
Yeah, because I know, unfortunately in my case, I didn't know about it until I heard Ali and Dipti talk about it. And so I think, yeah, that's why I'm really excited because we'll be partnering with the folks that are providing that service directly. So maybe there's like some special considerations for like more rural-minded communities.
I've seen them present at summits and different things like that, you know, with Department of Behavioral Health and Recovery, but I'd like to bring them local.
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, like I said, they've definitely been providing crisis line services for quite some time. I think they also do. They're part of the national like crisis line that system as well. And so I think they definitely have the credentials to provide a very comprehensive crisis line service. So I'd be happy to, yeah, kind of. That's why, and one of my role is to definitely go across the communities and bring those questions or comments up to make sure it's kind of fitting the unique needs of our region.
So does Beacon plan on creating marketing material for those resources?
Yeah, I was gonna say, because right now these materials, they're definitely, I think there's so once we get with Crisis Connection, I think there may be some changes coming out, because I know we like to refresh our materials on a yearly basis. And so yeah, just to kind of, here's these additional resources to contact you, because if I remember correctly from what Ali and Dipti were sharing from Crisis Connections, anyone can currently call the Team Link line, or the Warm line, or the Recovery line. But again, I think it's that community education piece that's really important, so that way someone in Mattawa knows, like, hey, I didn't know there was a Team Link, I'll give that a call.
Can you ask if they could create a digital medium that can go on TVs? Because that's really, I mean, that's where people are sitting in the waiting area and they see, everybody sees that.
Yeah.
Where this is great to have, but it's not in your face, like,
I was
like
gonna
the
say,
slide that Gigi was talking about, you know, that's what people see, so.
So do you know if there's anything like that already?
well, that's a good suggestion that I haven't considered, because I know most waiting rooms, there's like a TV going on, and so maybe something specific, so they're waiting in their area, they're like, oh, hey, we, you know, kind of have that captive audience in that moment. That's a good idea. Because what I've also heard too, like in more rural-minded communities, like radio tends to be more effective than other forms of kind of outreach.
Well, if you gave us the information, we could create the PSA.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That, but I would want it to have the right.
Oh no, and we always encourage folks like the crisis line, because right now that crisis line number, the 1-800-852-2923 number, it's not going to change. So all this great work about like printing them out in bracelets, don't worry, we're not going to change that number, or like on the back of student IDs. That number won't change. The only thing that will be changing is just that provider. So we always encourage folks to, definitely put that number where they think it'd be beneficial for the page numbers. So great idea. I was gonna say, I hadn't considered that. Maybe like a short, imagine 30-second clip we definitely want to do it in English and Spanish. Because I know there's been, a very big Spanish speaking population out here. Okay, any other questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, insults? Okay. This is where I do a quick shout out. Hi, Mom, I'm on TV. Or hey, well, thanks, everyone. You're always, like I mentioned, these are my last 2 boxes. I didn't want to make more just because of the pending change, and so feel free to take these. And there's more materials out here, and so if we do get new materials, we'll be the first folks to get those updated ones. So, anyways, thank you. Thank you for letting me present.
Thank you.
Thank you.